The noon sun hit the town of Red Mesa like a hammer of fire. Heat shimmered off the dusty road as Sheriff Barrett Holbrook walked its length, his polished boots tapping on the warped boardwalk. Every step carried the confidence of a man who'd never tasted hunger. His gold pocket watch gleamed against his vest. His leather holster looked new enough to still smell of the tannery. People nodded as he passed. Nobody smiled. This wasn't that kind of greeting. Folks in Red Mesa respected him the same way soldiers respect a firing squad. Sheriff Holbrook didn't bend. Not for the poor. Not for excuses. Not for anyone. The wind kicked up a swirl of grit. Holbrook brushed it from his sleeve with a small frown. That sleeve alone cost more than most families spent in a winter. Then he saw her. Through the dusty window of Calder's bakery, a woman in a torn black dress moved with a kind of desperate hesitation. She checked the aisle, checked the door. Her hands trembled as she reached for a loaf of bread and slipped it beneath her faded shawl. Holbrook's jaw tightened. Another thief, he thought. Another vagrant taking what she had no right to. He stepped inside. The bell over the door gave a sharp, accusing ring. The woman froze. The bakery smell, warm bread, yeast, and flour, hung heavy in the air between them. She looked small beneath the weight of her own dress, so thin it seemed the desert wind could lift her away. Gray streaks wove through her dark hair. Her boots were worn through at the toes. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They weren't angry. They weren't cunning. Just tired. So tired. "Ma'am," Holbrook said, resting his hand on his gun, "I'm going to need you to show me what's under that shawl." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if steadying herself. Then she pulled out the stolen bread with shaking hands. I can explain, Sheriff," she whispered. "I'm sure you can," Holbrook replied. "They always do. But theft is theft. You're under arrest." Her breath hitched. "Please, please, Sheriff. My children. They haven't eaten in 2 days. I was going to pay when I found work. Save it for the judge." His voice held the cold certainty of carved stone. He pulled the cuffs from his belt. Her shoulders sagged, and something inside her seemed to fold in on itself, quiet, defeated, bone-deep weary. As he walked her to the jail, something faint tugged at the back of his mind. Her posture, her way of speaking, her dignity even in humiliation. She wasn't like the others he'd hauled in. But Holbrook pushed that thought away. Inside the sheriff's office, the iron bars clanged shut. The sound echoed like a verdict. The woman sat on the narrow cot. Not slumped, not complaining, sitting with her hands folded in her lap, like someone raised to believe dignity wasn't something the world could take. Holbrook noticed the way she kept touching her left dress pocket. "Name for the record," he said, settling behind his mahogany desk. "Evelyn Braddock," she answered. "Widow Braddock, if it matters." It did matter, but he didn't know why yet. "Age and occupation?" 38. "And I suppose I have no occupation now." Her fingers brushed that pocket again. "Children at home?" Holbrook asked. "2. Sarah is 12. Luke is 9. The faint crack in her voice hit, like a pebble breaking a still pond. "They're waiting for me to bring supper," she added softly. "You should have thought of them before you decided to steal." The harshness in his own tone surprised him. She flinched, not from fear but from shame. It settled on her like dust. Holbrook shifted uncomfortably. "Where are your children staying?" "In the old Hamley cabin, outside town." Holbrook stiffened. The Hamley cabin had been abandoned for years. The roof leaked. The floor sagged. Snakes took shelter in one of the bedrooms. "No one chooses to live there," he muttered. Evelyn looked down at her hands. "It keeps most of the rain off." "Mostly." Holbrook studied her dress. It had once been fine wool. Faded now, patched too many times to count, but the stitching told of better years. Her speech carried education. Her posture carried habit. And her eyes, they carried loss. "What happened to your husband?" "Killed at Shiloh," she said quietly. 3 years ago." He saw her swallow hard, saw the way her breath trembled. "No family, none who claim us anymore." The room felt hotter. He wiped sweat from his temple. She sat still, as if heat didn't matter. Hours passed. Shadows crawled across the floor. Twice he saw her wipe a silent tear. Just after sunset, The door burst open. Deputy Cal Weston stood panting, dust on his shirt. "Sheriff, you need to hear this." He glanced at Evelyn in the cell. Maybe we step outside?" Evelyn gripped the bars. Her knuckles turned white. "What's wrong?" she whispered. "Are they hurt? Please tell me my babies are safe." Something cracked inside Holbrook's chest. Her fear wasn't for herself. It never had been. Cal shook his head. "Children are safe, ma'am. But the cabin, Sheriff, it's worse than we thought. Holes in the roof big enough to see the sky. No beds. And the kids, they're skin and bone." Holbrook's jaw clenched. "That doesn't excuse stealing," he said automatically. "No, sir. But this does." Cal pulled a crumpled paper from his vest. "Found this nailed to their door. Eviction notice. They're being thrown out tomorrow." Evelyn's face drained of color. "But they promised me until the end of the month," she whispered. "Hanley changed his mind," Cal muttered, disgust thick in his voice. "Says vagrants lower property value." Holbrook felt something sour twist in his stomach. "And the children wanted me to give her this," Cal added. He handed Holbrook a small, folded note, written in shaky little letters. Holbrook opened it. "Mama, we share the last apple like you taught us. We love you. We're trying to be brave." Luke drew a picture of Papa coming home from the war. "We didn't tell him yet." Holbrook swallowed. Hard. The little boy still believed his father was coming home. Evelyn wiped a tear with the back of her trembling hand. "Sheriff," she whispered, "I know I have no right to ask, but if you let me go just long enough to find somewhere safe for them tonight, I'll come back. I swear it. Your word." Holbrook snapped. "You expect me to trust the word of a thief?" The moment he said it, he wished he hadn't. Her expression didn't harden. It didn't burn. It simply broke. "You're right," she said softly. "I suppose I've failed at everything that mattered." Cal cleared his throat. "Sheriff, maybe she should tell you about what she did during the cholera outbreak last year." Holbrook frowned. "What are you talking about?" "And about the letter," Cal added. Holbrook turned sharply. "What letter?" Evelyn's hand moved instinctively to her pocket. Not fear of punishment. Fear of being seen. Cal stepped closer. "Sheriff, you need to see it. Because if I'm right, everything about this situation is wrong." Holbrook reached for the cell keys. Neither man had any idea the letter in Evelyn Braddock's pocket would change their lives forever. Sheriff Barrett Holbrook stood at the cell door, keys in hand, staring at Evelyn Braddock as though seeing her for the first time. The tension in the air felt thick enough to lift with his bare hands. Her fingers were curled protectively over that left pocket, the pocket that held the letter Cal Weston claimed would change everything. Holbrook cleared his throat. "Mrs. Braddock," he said slowly, "I'll need that letter." Evelyn lifted her chin, but her voice trembled. "It's private. Sheriff, it isn't. The law permits me to inspect anything a prisoner carries." He meant the words to sound firm. They came out strangely gentle. Her shoulders rose and fell in a small, defeated breath. With unsteady fingers, she reached in her dress and pulled out a single folded envelope, cream-colored, edges worn soft by handling. It looked out of place in a life as harsh as hers. For a second, she just held it to her chest, as if letting go meant letting go of the last piece of who she used to be. Then, wordlessly, she extended it through the bars. Holbrook took it carefully. The envelope bore elegant handwriting. "Mrs. Evelyn Braddock, Angel of Red Mesa." He blinked. "Angel?" His eyes dropped to the return address. "Office of the Territorial Governor, Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory." A letter from the governor. Holbrook felt something cold ripple across his spine. "Sheriff," Evelyn whispered, "please just read it quickly and give it back." He opened it. The official seal gleamed faintly in the lamplight. The paper felt heavy, expensive government issue. He began to read. "Mrs. Braddock, it is with profound gratitude that the Territory recognizes your extraordinary courage during the cholera epidemic of 1886. His breath stalled. He read on silently, his lips tightening, his eyes darting to Evelyn, then back to the page. "Your tireless work treating the sick, your willingness to enter infected homes when others fled, and the countless lives saved through your actions shall forever stand as a testament to your bravery." Holbrook's hand shook slightly. Cal Weston shifted, whispering, "She saved half the county, Sheriff." Holbrook kept reading. "Your medical skill, compassion, and sacrifice have earned you the Territorial Medal of Valor, our highest civilian honor. Enclosed is your medallion." Something metallic slipped from the envelope and landed softly on the desk. A small gold medal with a faded ribbon. Holbrook stared. He'd arrested a hero. A woman who had given her health, her very future, to save strangers. He felt suddenly smaller and colder. He read the final lines. "We acknowledge with regret that the illness you contracted while tending to cholera victims has permanently damaged your lungs and hands, rendering you unable to continue your medical practice. The territory remains forever indebted to you, Mrs. Braddock." Signed, Territorial Governor M.C. Harrison. Holbrook lowered the letter slowly. The room felt silent as an empty church. Evelyn Braddock was staring at the floor, cheeks wet with tears she hadn't let fall until now. "You," Holbrook whispered. "You were a doctor?" "I was," she replied softly, "until the fever ruined my lungs, until my hands wouldn't stop trembling. No one wants a doctor who might cough blood during a procedure." Her voice carried no bitterness, only a worn-out honesty. Holbrook's throat tightened. He, Barrett Holbrook, the proud, rigid lawman, had thrown a Medal of Valor recipient into a jail cell over a loaf of bread. Cal Weston spoke carefully. "Sheriff, she wasn't stealing for herself. She was starving. The kids were starving." Holbrook pressed his fingers to his forehead. He felt dizzy, unsteady, ashamed. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "The medal, the letter, they're all I have left from the life I once lived. They don't feed children." Cal cleared his throat again. "Sheriff, there's more." Holbrook looked up sharply. "What now?" "I spoke with Doc Hanley, Mrs. Henderson, even the hotel keeper. She went to 7 places today. 7. Asking for work. Any work. Cleaning floors. Washing linens. Hauling water. They all turned her away." Evelyn clasped her hands together, steadying herself. "I treated the Hanley boy when his fever nearly took him," she said quietly. "I sat all night with Mrs. Henderson's mother when she was dying. I held the hotel keeper's wife's hand when she lost her vagrant pricing to discourage poor folks from staying around." Holbrook felt something hot rise in his chest. Not the usual irritation he carried like a badge. Something else. Rage. The kind that rattled the bones. He looked at Evelyn, her thin hands, the trembling in her fingers, the quiet strength in her tired posture. A woman who had gone door to door offering honest work before she ever thought of taking bread. He'd treated her like a criminal, but she had been Red Mesa's angel. Holbrook stood up suddenly. His chair scraped across the floor. "Cal," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "ride to the Hanley cabin. Bring the children here." Cal blinked. "Sheriff, you're not. I'm not leaving 2 starving children alone in a collapsing shack while their mother sits in a cell over bread," Holbrook snapped. "Go. Now." Cal didn't hesitate. He sprinted out the door. Evelyn stared at Holbrook with a mixture of hope and fear. What are you going to do?" Holbrook reached for the keyring. The weight of it felt different now. Not duty, not pride, responsibility. The lock clicked open. "You're free to go, Mrs. Braddock." Evelyn's breath hitched. She touched the open door as if unsure it was real. But I stole." "No," Holbrook said firmly. "You did not. You borrowed with intent to repay. That's legal." It wasn't. Not exactly. But the law had been bent far worse in far lesser hands. He stepped back from the cell. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "You don't." "Yes, I do." Emotion tightened his voice. "I've worn this badge a long time thinking I serve justice. But I've only served the law. And today I learned they're not always the same." Evelyn pressed her hand over her mouth, trying not to cry. Holbrook continued, voice steadying. "When Cal brings your children, you'll stay here tonight. Safe. Federal warm." "What about tomorrow?" she whispered. "Tomorrow," he said, straightening with a fire she had never seen in him before. "I'll be paying visits, starting with Calder's Bakery. Price gouging during hardship is a felony." He paused, and after that, he gave a thin, dangerous smile. "I'm going to remind this town what gratitude looks like." A quiet knock came from the doorway. It was Cal. Behind him stood two thin children, Sarah holding Luke's hand, both of them wide-eyed and trembling. They saw their mother. She saw them, and the world stopped. Luke ran first, nearly tripping. Sarah followed, tears streaking down her cheeks. Evelyn knelt, arms wide. They collided with her in a desperate, clinging embrace. Holbrook turned away, swallowing hard. For the first time in years, he felt something crack open inside him. Humanity. The sheriff's office filled with the soft sounds of a reunited family. Quiet sobs, whispered reassurances, Luke's small hiccuping breaths as he clung to his mother's waist. Sarah held on just as tightly, pressing her face into Evelyn's shoulder like she feared the world might snatch her mother away again. Sheriff Barrett Holbrook stood a few steps back, hands on his hips, jaw tight. He didn't dare interrupt the moment. Even his badge seemed to sit differently on his vest, as if judging him for the hours Evelyn had spent behind bars. Cal Weston stepped beside him, hat in hand. "Sheriff," he murmured, "what do you want me to do with Calder?" Holbrook's eyes flicked to the door, where the baker sat handcuffed on a bench, scowling as though he was the wrong party. Holbrook's voice dropped into a dangerous calm. "We'll get to him," he said, "but first things first." He crossed the office and knelt beside Evelyn and the children. Luke peeked up at him, cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. "Sheriff," the boy whispered, "are we in trouble?" Evelyn tried to hush him, but Holbrook shook his head gently. "No, son. The only person in trouble here is the man who let you go hungry." Luke blinked, confused. Sarah straightened, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. Holbrook rose to his full height. "Cal, take the children into the kitchen. Heat some soup. Get them bread. Real bread, not Calder's robbery prices." Cal nodded and ushered the children away. Evelyn watched them disappear, her hands trembling with leftover fear and relief. Holbrook spoke softly. "They'll be safe now. Eat as much as they want. They've earned that and more." Evelyn looked at him, tears shining in her eyes. "Sheriff, thank you." You don't owe me thanks," he cut in. "The town owes you." He turned to face Calder. The baker shrank back slightly. Sweat gathered along his hairline. "Let's talk, Henry," Holbrook said. "I hear you've been running a special price on bread." Calder puffed up immediately. "I can charge what I like. It's my shop." "Not during hardship," Holbrook replied. "Territorial law calls that gouging. Felony gouging at that." "Hardship," Calder scoffed. "There's no drought. No shortage. You're stretching the law." Holbrook stepped closer. His shadow swallowed Calder's. "You tell me starvation isn't a hardship," the sheriff growled. "Tell me a widow watching her children waste away doesn't count." Calder's mouth opened and closed like a hooked fish. Holbrook's voice hardened further. "You knew who she was, Cal. Evelyn Braddock saved your daughter during the cholera outbreak. Stayed up 3 nights with her. Held her while she burned with fever. You knew all that. Yet you watched her beg for work, and you humiliated her." Calder's face turned blotchy red. "I didn't know. You knew," Holbrook barked. "And even if you didn't, you know now. Which means you'll face the law for what you did." Holbrook nodded to Cal Weston. "Take him to the holding cell at the back." Cal grabbed Calder by the arm and dragged him away. The baker sputtered protests, but no one listened. Holbrook turned back to Evelyn. She stood in the lamp-lit room, looking smaller but somehow stronger now that the truth had been laid bare. Her hands pressed against her heart where the metal had once hung on a ribbon. Her breath came uneven, but her eyes were steady. "Sheriff," she whispered, "why are you doing this?" Holbrook leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. "Because I was wrong," he said, "and I intend to set things right." He walked to a drawer and pulled out a ledger, thick with dust. He flipped through pages until he found the entry he wanted. "Evelyn Braddock," he read aloud. "Pension owed to recipients of the Territorial Medal of Valor." He tapped the column beside her name. 3 years of payments," he said quietly. "All marked as pending. None delivered." Evelyn swayed slightly. "I didn't know. No one ever told me." "That's the point," Holbrook said. "Someone didn't want to pay out the pension. And if paperwork goes missing, poor widows don't exactly have lawyers to complain on their behalf." Evelyn put a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Holbrook continued, "Tomorrow morning, I'll ride personally to the county seat and make sure every penny owed to you is delivered." Her voice cracked. "Sheriff, I didn't expect help. I've gotten used to being invisible." Holbrook shook his head. "You're invisible because people like me never bother to look. That ends tonight." A quiet knock sounded at the kitchen door. Sarah peeked out. "Sheriff? Luke's asleep at the table. We wrapped him in one of the blankets." "Mama." He smiled for the first time in weeks. Evelyn's breath caught. Holbrook nodded softly. "You can sleep in here tonight. All three of you. I want to have you back in that cabin." Evelyn hesitated. "Sheriff, I can't impose." Holbrook's voice softened in a way no one in Red Mesa had ever heard before. "You're not imposing. You're a citizen under my protection. That's what this badge is for." He moved to the window. Outside, lanterns flickered down Main Street. Shopkeepers were closing their doors, unaware their world was about to be shaken. Holbrook's jaw tightened. "Tomorrow," he said under his breath, "this town remembers who you are." Evelyn approached him gently. "Sheriff, what will you do?" Holbrook exhaled a long breath, the kind that seemed to carry years of rigid thinking out of his chest. "I'm going to speak with every store owner who turned you away, every person who pretended not to know you, every soul who watched a hero starve." His eyes hardened, their edge colder than the metal of his badge. "And when I'm done," he said, "Red Mesa will remember what honor looks like." Evelyn closed her eyes and let out a trembling breath, a breath that sounded almost like hope. For the first time in 3 long years, the morning sun rose over Red Mesa, slow and heavy, casting long shadows across Main Street. It was the kind of dawn that made a man think about the choices he'd made and the ones still waiting to be faced. Sheriff Barrett Holbrook stepped out of his office, adjusting his vest, badge polished to a clean shine. Not for show, for purpose. Today wasn't routine. Today wasn't about his pride or his reputation. Today it was about justice. Inside, Evelyn Braddock and her children slept bundled together on cots pushed close. Sarah's arm lay protectively over Luke. Evelyn's breathing was soft but uneven, as if even rest carried weight. Holbrook closed the door quietly so he wouldn't wake them. Cal Weston stood waiting beside the hitching post, already saddling the horses. "Morning, Sheriff," Cal said. Holbrook nodded. "Morning. Ready to make a few rounds." Cal gave a half grin. "Town's going to talk today." "Good," Holbrook replied. "Let them." He stepped onto the boardwalk, boots echoing against the planks. The early shoppers paused. Some whispered. Some nodded politely. No one knew yet why the sheriff was walking with such hard purpose. Holbrook stopped at the first door. Doc Hanley's clinic. He pushed inside. Hanley looked up from polishing his spectacles. "Sheriff," he said lightly, "to what do I owe?" Holbrook set the Medal of Valor on the table. Hanley froze. Holbrook's voice was calm but sharp. "You remember this, don't you, Doc? The day the governor's man rode into town to present it. The day Evelyn Braddock saved a dozen lives and almost lost her own." Hanley's face paled. "Sheriff, you turned her away yesterday," Holbrook said. "Refused her work. After she nursed half your patients through cholera. She's sick now," Hanley stammered. "And I couldn't hire." "You couldn't hire a hero?" Holbrook stepped closer. "Or you didn't want the town to see you employ someone you all decided was beneath you?" Hanley swallowed. Hard. Holbrook leaned in. "You owe her. And this morning, you're going to make it right. Publicly." Hanley nodded quickly, shame washing over his features. Holbrook took the medal back, slipped it into his pocket, and turned without waiting for more excuses. Next stop, Henderson's General Store. Mrs. Henderson looked up, startled, clutching a spool of twine. Holbrook didn't bother with preamble. "You refused Evelyn Braddock work yesterday." Mrs. Henderson wrung her hands. "Sheriff, I remember what she'd done, but business is hard, and people talk. People talk." Holbrook snapped. "People talk now. They're about to talk more. Because last night your store shelves were full while a Medal of Valor recipient slept in a collapsing cabin with 2 starving children." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know it was that bad. I swear I didn't know." "You did," Holbrook said gently. "You just didn't look." Mrs. Henderson began to cry silently. "What can I do?" Holbrook pointed to the front window. You can start by posting a notice. Clear, large letters, saying Evelyn Braddock has a permanent position here. She nodded, tears dripping on her apron. I'll write it now. Holbrook tipped his hat and stepped back into the street. Cal followed him quietly, the tension in town rising with each stop. They walked into the hotel, where the owner nearly fainted when Holbrook laid the medal on the counter. Then the blacksmith, the laundry shop, the dry goods dealer. One by one, each business owner paled, stammered, and bowed their head in shame when Holbrook confronted them with the truth they'd ignored. Red Mesa wasn't cruel because its people were evil. It was cruel because they'd forgotten gratitude. Holbrook meant to remind them. By midday, the sheriff and deputy rode back to the office. And by then, the whispers had grown into full conversation. Folks rushed between stores, comparing stories. Did you hear Evelyn Braddock has a Medal of Valor? She saved my cousin during the outbreak. I can't believe she was living in that old shack. The sheriff's turning the whole town upside down over her. Word traveled faster than the wind in Red Mesa. Holbrook dismounted and stepped inside the office. The smell of warm stew and bread filled the air. Luke was awake now, swinging his legs from a chair as he ate. Sarah was brushing her mother's hair gently, few stray strands catching the sunlight. Evelyn looked up when Holbrook entered. She stood quickly, posture straight despite exhaustion. "Sheriff," she said, "I don't know how to thank you." Holbrook shook his head. "You don't need to. I'm just doing what should have been done long ago." Her gaze softened. "You didn't have to help us. Most men wouldn't." He felt a strange tightness in his chest at her words. Not something painful, but something humbling. "Evelyn, this town owes you more than you'll ever owe it." At that moment, Cal Weston stepped inside with a stack of papers. "Sheriff," he said, "these came from the county office. Your request was processed fast." Holbrook flipped through the pages. His jaw tightened with satisfaction. "Evelyn," he said, turning the papers toward her, "your pension is restored. All 3 years back pay included. Enough to buy a home, supplies, maybe even start a clinic. A real one." Evelyn's knees buckled slightly, and Holbrook moved without thinking, steadying her elbow. She blinked up at him, overwhelmed. I don't deserve all this." Holbrook met her eyes. "Yes," he said, "you do." A knock sounded at the door. The boardwalk outside was filled with townsfolk, dozens of them, hat in hand, heads bowed low. Doc Hanley stood in front, Mrs. Henderson beside him, the hotel keeper, the blacksmith, the grocer, almost the entire street. They weren't talking. They weren't complaining. They weren't making excuses. They were waiting. For her. Evelyn stared at them, stunned. Holbrook stepped aside and motioned gently. "They came to see you," he said softly. "Not me. You." Evelyn took a shaky breath and stepped forward. As she appeared in the doorway, the entire crowd bowed their heads as one, slow, shameful, reverent. A hero had passed through hell, and they had been the ones who pushed her there. The silence was deep, heavy, and honest. Holbrook watched her face in that moment. The disbelief, the trembling relief, the fragile rising strength, and felt something shift deep in his chest. Red Mesa was finally remembering its angel. And he, for once in his life, felt proud of the man wearing his badge. The crowd outside the sheriff's office didn't move at first. They stood in a quiet half-circle, hats clutched in their hands, dust swirling around their boots. Morning light washed over their faces, faces marked by guilt, shame, and something softer, something like awakening. Evelyn Braddock stepped forward, Luke holding her hand, Sarah close behind. Her dress was still worn, her cheeks still hollow, but her presence carried a dignity that silenced every whisper. Doc Hanley cleared his throat, eyes down. "Mrs. Braddock, I owe you an apology." He swallowed hard. "I should have taken you in yesterday. You saved my boy. I'll never forget that again." Mrs. Henderson wiped her eyes with her apron. "I've written the job post, Evelyn. It's yours as long as you want it." The hotel keeper stepped forward, twisting his hat nervously. "Ma'am, I'd like to offer you and the young uns a room. Clean beds, warm fire, no charge." Evelyn blinked in disbelief. All of you, you don't have to." but Holbrook stepped beside her, voice steady. Yes, they do. Silence rippled through the crowd. A few nodded, others shifted, humbled. Holbrook spoke loud enough for the whole street to hear. This woman nearly died saving this town during the cholera outbreak. Most of you owe loved ones to her care. His gaze sharpened, and when she needed you, you turn away. People bowed, their heads deeper. Holbrook continued, voice firm but not cruel. Today isn't about punishment. It's about setting things right. Evelyn looked at him sharply, emotions swelling behind her eyes. Holbrook tipped his hat toward the crowd. If any of you want to help, now's the time. At first, only one person moved. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward with a basket of food, bread, cheese, apples. Then the blacksmith. Then the seamstress. Then the ranch hands. One by one, they stepped forward with offerings, blankets, canned beans, flour, candles, small coins, even a pair of freshly mended boots for Sarah. Luke squeezed his mother's hand. Mama, we ain't invisible anymore. Evelyn's throat tightened. She lowered her knees and hugged him close. Holbrook watched the scene with something warm stirring in his chest. Not pride, not righteousness. Something simpler. Respect. He stepped forward and lifted his voice again. Folks, that's enough for now. Let the family rest. We've got work to do. The crowd nodded, one by one backing away reverently before dispersing across Main Street. The dust settled behind them, leaving only the quiet hum of a town waking up to its conscience. Inside the office, Holbrook held the door open for Evelyn and her children. When they were seated, he set a ledger on the desk. Now, he said, there's more to fix. Evelyn frowned. There's more. Holbrook opened the ledger to another page. Yes, he said, your pension's been restored. But I found something else in the records. He turned the book so Evelyn could see. Her eyes widened. This is our old farm, she whispered. Holbrook nodded. Your husband bought that land fair and square. And after he passed, the bank foreclosed on you illegally. They used your illness against you. That's a violation of territorial property code. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Sarah whispered, Mama, does that mean? Holbrook nodded again, his voice steady. It means the farm is yours again. Evelyn let out a soft, broken sound. She didn't cry. Not fully, but her eyes filled and her breath trembled like a candle flame in wind. Sheriff, I don't know what to say. Holbrook shook his head. You don't need to say anything. Just breathe. Evelyn whispered, I haven't breathed easy in years. Holbrook's voice softened. Then you're overdue. She smiled, small, shy, aching, and it struck Holbrook harder than any outlaw he'd ever fought. Cal Weston stepped inside, wiping dust from his coat. Sheriff, he said, Calder's bail hearing is set for noon. Folks are already gathering outside the courthouse. Holbrook nodded. Evelyn looked uneasy. Sheriff, please don't make a spectacle. Holbrook gave a reassuring half-smile. Ma'am, justice ain't a spectacle. It's a setting straight, and every person in this town needs to see it. Cal glanced at Holbrook. You ready? Holbrook settled his hat on his head, the brim casting a firm shadow across his eyes. More ready than I've ever been. As they stepped, outside, the sunlight fell sharper, cleaner. The air held a strange stillness, like red Mesa was holding its breath. Holbrook turned to Evelyn. You and the children stay here. Rest. Eat. You're safe now. Evelyn paused, then placed her hand gently on his arm. Sheriff Holbrook, whatever you're doing for us, thank you. Her touch was feather-light, but it sent a quiet ripple through him. He tipped his hat, voice low. Ma'am, I'm doing my job, the way I should have done it all along. He walked out the door before she could reply. As Holbrook and Cal headed toward the courthouse, people parted like water around them. Eyes followed. Whispers rose. Something was happening in Red Mesa. Something bigger than an arrest. Bigger than a letter. Bigger than a sheriff's pride. A whole town was learning what justice really meant. And Barrett Holbrook, once the proud, rigid lawman, was leading the charge. The Red Mesa courthouse hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Folks pressed along the steps, lining the dusty street, craning their necks just to glimpse the sheriff who'd flipped the whole town on its head. Sheriff Barrett Holbrook walked through the murmuring crowd with Deputy Cal Weston at his side. The townspeople stepped aside, hats coming off in quiet respect, or caution, he couldn't tell which. The air carried tension, thick and humming like a wire pulled tight. Inside, Henry Calder stood before the judge, hands cuffed, face flushed with indignation. But when Holbrook entered, the baker's anger wavered into something like fear. Judge Rollins fixed the sheriff with a stern gaze. "Sheriff Holbrook, we're here to discuss your charge against Mr. Calder. Price gouging during hardship is a serious claim." Holbrook nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, and I stand by every word." Calder sputtered. "Hardship? There's no crisis in this town." Holbrook stepped forward. "No crisis." His voice rose slightly. "A widow sleeping in a collapsing cabin with 2 starving children isn't hardship." The courtroom fell still. Holbrook continued, anger tightening his jaw. "Mrs. Braddock went to 7 businesses looking for work. 7. Every one of them turned her away. And when she came to Calder's bakery, he charged her $3 for 50-cent bread." Gasps rippled through the room. Judge Rollins narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Calder, is that true?" Calder swallowed hard. Well, I don't set prices based on. You set them based on desperation," Holbrook snapped. "Not once did you ask why she needed that bread. You didn't care." The judge raised a hand. "That's enough, Sheriff. The law is clear. Mr. Calder, price gouging is prosecutable during public hardship, and the sheriff has established the condition." He struck his gavel. "You'll pay a fine of $50 and complete 60 days of community service." Calder's shoulders sagged. He nodded, defeated. Holbrook stood tall, but he didn't smile. Justice wasn't something to smile about. It was something to uphold. As the crowd spilled out of the courthouse, people stopped Holbrook with murmured apologies, promises to do better, and awkward gratitude. But he brushed past them all. He had one more stop to make. When Holbrook reached the sheriff's office, the afternoon sun painted the sky in strokes of orange and red. He pushed open the door quietly. Evelyn sat at the table with Sarah and Luke, helping them finish bowls of stew. She looked up, and relief softened her features. "Sheriff," she said gently, "how did it go?" Holbrook set his hat down. Justice served. Luke hopped from his chair and ran to him. "Sheriff, Mama says we ain't ever going back to that old cabin. Is that real?" Holbrook smiled, rare, small, honest. "That's real, son." Sarah stepped beside him, shy but grateful. "Thank you, Sheriff Holbrook. You saved us." Holbrook shook his head. "No, your mama saved this town long before I ever lifted a finger." Evelyn's eyes shimmered. "You didn't have to help us," she whispered. "Not every man would have done what you did." Holbrook felt something twist in his chest, something warm, something he hadn't felt in years. He cleared his throat. "You're not alone anymore, Evelyn. Not while I wear this badge." She stood then, hands clasped in front of her, dignity radiating through her fragile frame. "What happens next?" she asked. Holbrook walked to the window overlooking Red Mesa. "Next," he said, "you rebuild your life. On your own terms." He turned toward her. "And the town helps you do it." Evelyn pressed a hand over her heart. For the first time in years, her shoulders weren't weighted down. Her breath wasn't tight. Hope, real hope, glowed in her eyes. "What about my clinic?" she asked quietly. "Is that truly possible?" Holbrook nodded. "More than possible. I spoke with the county this afternoon. A grant fund is available for medical service buildings. With your pension back, plus community donations, you can open a clinic right here in Red Mesa." Evelyn covered her mouth, tears spilling from her eyes. "Oh, Barrett," she whispered, then froze, suddenly apologetic. "Sheriff, I'm sorry." He surprised himself with a soft chuckle. "Barrett is just fine." For a moment, they held each other's gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Not romance, not expectation, respect, recognition, a quiet bond forged in hardship and truth. Cal Weston stepped in, hat in hand. "Sheriff? Folks outside say they want to speak with Mrs. Braddock." Holbrook motioned through the doorway. "Let them in." Moments later, townspeople gathered again, this time not out of guilt, but out of reverence. A small crowd filled the boardwalk, led by Mrs. Henderson carrying a sign. Evelyn Braddock Medical Clinic. It read in bold letters. Evelyn let out a small, shaky laugh. You didn't need to, we needed to, Mrs. Henderson said firmly. We owe you more than we can ever repay. Doc Hanley stepped forward, offering a set of keys. The old schoolhouse isn't being used anymore. We clean it up this afternoon. It's yours if you want it. Evelyn stared at the keys like they were made of gold. Holbrook stood at her side while her children pressed close, eyes glowing. Red Mesa had been cruel. But now, finally, it remembered. 3 months later, a new building stood at the edge of town. Whitewashed walls, bright blue shutters, a polished sign. Dr. Evelyn Braddock. Medical Clinic. Patients lined up daily. Not out of pity, out of trust, out of gratitude. Sarah helped with records. Luke carried supplies. Evelyn moved with purpose, her hands still trembling sometimes, her breath catching in cold weather, but her spirit strong as steel. And Sheriff Barrett Holbrook? He had changed too. No longer feared. Respected. A man who no longer served just the law, but justice. He kept Evelyn's Medal of Valor displayed in his office as a reminder of what courage looked like, and a reminder of his own transformation. Every Sunday, he walked down to the clinic to check in, not out of obligation, out of respect and gratitude, because Evelyn Braddock changed the town. But she changed him too. If you felt this tale in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wild West Emotional Tales, where every story rides through the dust, the danger, and the kind of love that never dies. See you in the next tale, partner.